There's been a lot of discussion since the 7th of October, 2023 about Zionism and what it is. I'm gonna describe to you the case for Zionism and how its very meaning is being misconstrued, and in fact, why its design emerged and why it is still important in the 21st century. The most important thing for us to do is to define what Zionism is. People online sometimes use the term Zionist or Zio as a slur. Some think that it means that they support Jewish ethnic supremacy, racism, apartheid, the current government, or military and settler expansion into the West Bank and Gaza. These are not defining features. So, it's important to define what Zionism actually is. Zionism is the indigenous land-back movement of Jews to the land of Israel, in which they will have self-determination. Key things about this definition are that it does not delineate the borders of what the land where self-determination is and does not rule out coexistence with Arabs in the lands of historic 20th century Palestine. In making my argument for the case, I will review questions or arguments made against it. One of the main points brought up in the conflict is the question of why is this needed? That there are countries such as the United States, Europe, or other countries for Jews to go. This viewpoint is not a sufficient answer for several reasons. First, many, approximately half, of Jews in Israel, are Mizrachi, meaning they come from Middle Eastern countries, often having immigrated to Israel through forcible ethnic cleansing, and have no other country to return to. Countries such as Iraq or Iran would certainly deny citizenship for these people if they were to leave the land of Israel. Secondly, the existence of Israel is tied to Jewish safety and having a safe place for Jews. There is historical precedent that the Jewish diaspora, the land outside Israel, is not sufficient to protect Jews around the globe. In the 1930s, anti-Semitism skyrocketed, particularly in Germany. There is difficulty for people to leave to countries such as the United States and France. Additionally, Britain significantly restricted immigration to its colony, called Mandatory Palestine, due to Arab concerns about demographic balances. This historical precedent shows that if Jewish persecution comes again, the diaspora cannot be trusted as sufficiently being able to protect the Jewish people. Also, in any theoretical one-state solution with either binational or Arab rule, there would be limitations towards mass immigration in a time of need due to demographic concerns. So, some people may hear that argument and agree that there certainly was a need for a safe haven for Jews in the first half of the 20th century, but that there is no longer a need with the collective memory of World War II and increased sensitivity to anti-Semitism. Full stop. However, unfortunately, this is not the case. Jews are one of the most intensely and most documented group of people with millennia of pogroms, massacres, and riots against them. Violence began with the Roman empires in the 1st and 2nd century, while violence occurred in the Middle East and Europe throughout 2000 years. In 628 CE, there was a massacre against Jews in town of Kaaba, Saudi Arabia. Also, in the Middle East, there were violent riots there, such as Iraq and Yemen around the coming of the partition plan for the State of Israel. In Europe, there's many documented episodes of violence across Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and Russia. Today, there's unfortunately been heightened anti-Semitism, including explicit calls for violence against Jews. For instance, radical factions in Islamist groups or protest spaces called for a repeat of the Battle of Kaaba to occur to the Jews. Additionally, there have been calls of F the Jews on the 9th of October, 2023 in Australia and reports from eyewitnesses that there were explicit calls to kill Jews. The terminology is so vile that I can't even mention it in this video, but it can be searched online. Beyond rhetoric, there has been real-world violence, including violence in Colorado, Washington, D.C., and London, where Jews have been either attacked or killed, even at synagogues. Religious hate crimes have a vast majority being against Jews, despite only making up 2% of the US population. Taking a step back, if we take the 2000-year history of violence, bigotry, and libels against Jews, there is no evidence that it will slow down in the 21st and 22nd century. For this reason, the existence of Israel, as a safe haven for Jews will provide safety to the diaspora. Obviously, safety within Israel is another concern, but this is something possible through diplomacy. Another claim that people make against Israel is that Jews do not have a valid claim to the land. This often goes through several avenues. One statement is that the Kingdom of Judea never existed. This is weak due to archaeological evidence of Jewish symbols that date back to the Temple of Solomon and David, which goes back 3,000 years. The Bible is also a source of this, but there are likely some historical inaccuracies with it as a sole source. There are ethnic groups within Israel and the West Bank, known as Samaritans, who still name themselves in patterns kin to that in Jewish tradition and read the Torah. These people, which make up less than 1,000 people, even get citizenship in Israel proper due to that connection to an Israelite people. There is also DNA evidence that supports Ashkenazi Jews having ancestral ties to the Middle East. Additionally, in Judaism, there is a designation of someone as a Kohen, which means that they are descendant of the high priest from the time of the first and second temples. Some of these people have last names, such as Kogan, Cohen, or Kahane. These people have been shown to have a shared ancestor which dates back 3,300 years ago in the Middle Eastern area, which does support the claim that modern-day Jews do have connection to the Middle East. This does not negate the claim that Palestinians have heritage that is deep in the land. It also does not suggest that Palestinians may not have been converted Jews in former Israel, essentially Israelites who are now Muslim after the Arab colonial conquest from Saudi Arabia. All these facts do not exist in a vacuum. It is still possible for a shared ancestry to exist. However, it is disingenuous to claim that Jews do not have a genetic and historic tie to the land. There's also a spiritual tie to the land, as I will discuss later. There is a commentary that the claim to the land dating back to 3,000 years when Judea was established and 2,000 years when the Jews were eventually kicked out of Judea is weak since it was such a long time ago. As a counterclaim, there is no expiration for a land-back national movement. There is a clear historical precedent, suggested in my previous commentary on anti-Semitism, that Jews were not accepted Europeans Americans, and often given second-class citizenship. In Middle Eastern countries, this was even stated explicitly as being a dhimmi. In other movements back to a diaspora, such as in the Pan-African movement, African Americans settled in Liberia, a Western African colony after being enslaved in America for several centuries. There is another argument that Jews do not have a strong claim to Israel, because there is not a direct connection between the religion of Judaism and Israel. This is somewhat of a flawed statement because Judaism is an ethno-religion, in that it is an ethnicity as well as a religion. As stated above, I gave evidence on why there was a connection of Jews to Israel from an ethnicity standpoint, and from a religious standpoint. Jews pray, facing Israel, state multiple blessings towards the land of Israel, and how God had promised this to us in the Bible, and there is a longing for the creation of the third temple, which would bring in the coming of the Jewish Messiah. We say a statement during each Passover that says next year in Jerusalem, which means that we are calling for the Messiah to come to Jerusalem in the next year. Due to the religious connection of Judaism to Israel, there's always been a persistent presence of Jews in the land, even after widespread Roman exile and other eras of empires in the region, most of which being Muslim empires. During the First Crusade, Christian crusaders destroyed Jewish communities living in Jerusalem around 1100. Even some famous rabbis, such as the Spanish Rabbi Ramban, who was forced to exile Spain due to anti-Semitism in the 1200s, resettled in Jerusalem, and in many other cases not mentioned, there's been a Jewish presence in land of Israel, which is directly related to its religious ties. There is approximately as high as 95% of Jews at the high end and 80% at the low end who consider themselves Zionist, and the number of true anti-Zionist rather than Israel indifferent people is around 5%. Thus, a focus honing in on a distinction between Zionists and Jews is extremely overblown, as the lack of overlap only represents about 5% of the population. A key tenet of Jewish religious and ethnic identity is a connection to Israel. A separate critique of Zionism is that by definition it leads to Jewish supremacy or support of Netanyahu government and policy. This is not true, as Palestinians are able to live among Jews in a Jewish state, or able to live nearby, either in a partitioned Palestinian state or a nearby Arab state. Many of the early Zionists were a fan of partition, which would give land to Jews and Muslims in two different states, similar to the partitioning of India and Pakistan. A two-state solution does promote the ability for two peoples to engage in self-determination and is able to satisfy both a Jewish yearning for self-determination and a Palestinian yearning for self-determination, which did not occur with British or Ottoman colonization. The ability for Arab Muslims to be citizens in Israel with full rights does not support the suggestion that there's Jewish supremacy within the land of Israel. So, Zionism does not necessarily mean that there will be any hierarchy between people by religion. The current existence of East Jerusalem and West Bank does provide a tiered system of rights within Israel and the occupied territories, but this current status quo is not a necessity of Zionism. As stated earlier, the existence of a Palestinian state with self-determination alongside a Jewish state with equal rights for Jews and Palestinians would still be compatible with Zionism and promote equal legal rights. The last critique of Zionism to highlight is the criticism that a Jewish state gives citizenship to Jews automatically but does not do this to Palestinians who have been displaced due to the War of 1948 or other wars. The reason this is done is to maintain the Jewish majority of the state. Quite certainly, if all Palestine is returned to lands where they have been prior to 1948, there would be an increase in the population of Palestine in that area, and with current fertility rates, led to an overpopulation relative to the Jewish population. So, in a theoretical two-state solution with the right of return, this would eventually lead to a designated Jewish state with a predominantly Arab Muslim Palestinian population, which would effectively negate the goals of Zionism. Some critique the difficulty of non-Jews to obtain citizenship in Israel, especially Palestinians. However, this is not unique to other countries, such as Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, who do not allow for easy naturalization if you are a non-Muslim. So putting it all together, why should someone care about a Zionist state of Israel? How is it moral? The answer is that Jews after millennia have deserved security to escape prosecution. Now, with escalating tensions among the Israeli and Palestinian populations, there is a need for security and peace for both people. This certainly can still happen with an actualization of a Palestinian state. However, this requires recognition of Israel and a commitment to peace. A focus on a right to return goes against Zionism and all of its justifications as stated earlier. We can still acknowledge the trauma of losing one's land. In other conflicts, people have been displaced. Mexicans in current-day Texas after Mexican War, Pakistan, India after partition, and Native Americans. It doesn't mean that the land cannot be shared with two groups having self-determination and rights of return for their peoples within their own borders. As mentioned earlier, the Zionist movement is a land-back movement where an indigenous population is able to have self-determination to turn the page on a history of unfettered persecution, hatred, and violence. There is a reality where this ideal can be wed with Palestinian rights and self-determination, but may require compromises on both sides. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope it's been able to provide some context on the definitions and motivations for Zionism.